And we're back. I'm Ryan and this is Lockie, and you have found yourself at the Abstractable Podcast. This is a show where we talk about some of our favourite thinkers and the ideas in which they have. Today is no exception, and we bring up a man who's had more mentions across our show than any other. This is Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
So in the episode, we discuss this concept of signal and noise and what it actually means. We also talk about the prevalence of randomness in the world and in your life and how it affects you in your everyday. And we also talk about why you shouldn't really care about the morning routines of your heroes, which is kind of prophesized on other podcasts. So why care about this book at all? Well, it kind of helps you understand the cause and effect relationship of the world around you and kind of what you should focus your energies on. So you can find out more about the author by listening to basically any episode that we've recorded of this podcast, because we talk about him all the time. But his website is fooledbyrandomness.com. And if you want to hear him get into ugly Twitter fights with people, you can go to his Twitter handle at @NNTaleb, where he absolutely runs amok. So also, don't forget, you can find full video of our episodes on YouTube if you want to see our faces. And also check out our show notes, including other books we mention in every episode, at our website, abstractable.co. We really hope you enjoy the episode. And we're back.
Back for another
sir?
episode. We made it. Unbelievable.
Yes. Tell me something interesting.
So random interesting fact for the day, hitting on our favourite word too. I was actually listening to a podcast, surprise, surprise, about blue light and the dangerous impacts that it can have on us.
Is this from like electronics and things like that?
Yeah, and I think most people seem to know about blue light's impact. You know, you don't want to be sitting in front of your computer late at night because it's going to impact on sleep and those type of things. And
like right now,
yeah,
for me,
perfect timing for you, mate, to do a podcast. And so it was this podcast, I think it was the Lifestylist podcast, and it was with a doctor named Alexander Wunsch. I think he's German. And he's basically spent all his time researching about light, and basically the crux of it is that there's a lot of damaging impacts, not just to our like circadian rhythm, but our eyes and overall like internal body chemistry that happens when being exposed to light that's closer. Sorry, I'm going to get this right. So light goes from like infrared to ultraviolet, and there's everything in between, the rainbow in between. So I think everything that's closer to the blue side from like green light is where we start to run into issues. And he said that the shift in people's, how we've had the big LED light shift, and whilst that's, great for energy consumption from a household perspective, it's actually quite bad for us in terms of impacting on circadian rhythm and different things. So something to bear in mind.
Okay, well, I suppose I'll have to not use my computer late at night and stuff. I mean, like, you've got the blue light thing. If on your phone now you can turn that off and on, but I suppose it doesn't do it for the computer screen, right?
Yeah, so have you heard of flux? So no. Flux is that exact thing you can get on your computer.
Right. Okay, well, I'll have to download that. But turns out pretty much everything kills you.
It does.
Doesn't it?
It does. Everything's trying to
Bit
kill
of
you.
blue light. Something else will get me first.
Well, the ironic thing is, right, is I think from a UV ray perspective, he spoke about, obviously going out into the sun and soaking up UV rays is, obviously damaging to skin. But he says, one of the internal mechanisms we have is cortisol, which is like the stress hormone. And so it's like, if you have enough cortisol running around in your system, you're going to reduce the impacts of the skin damage. And then he's like, so you work out that obviously it's just not good to be out in the sun because you don't want all the cortisol running around in your body either.
Okay.
So
Don't go outside.
but you still need to get vitamin D, mate.
Oh, there you go. Right. Everything in moderation, including moderation.
That's it.
So the book today.
We've come full circle, and he's got another dedicated episode. So we don't have to mention him multiple times throughout the show. We can just have one show dedicated to him today. And who's that?
Nassim Nicholas Taleb, Fooled by Randomness, his first book. So book 1 in the Incerto series. I hope that we keep recording the rest and do all 5 books at some point.
Have you finished them, mate? All of them?
No, not all of them. No, I haven't read Skin in the Game yet, and I'm probably halfway through the Bed of Proscruties. I can never say that properly.
That's it's a pretty short read, that one, isn't it? From memory.
Yeah, it's like something. They're just a bunch of quotes,
like rules to live by type thing.
You just kind of pick it up and read a couple. So it's not really a book to be read, I suppose.
Yeah, it's something you can just have on the dresser each day, mate. You can pick it up and have a little gander, get inspired for your day, and then go out.
Live your day like Nassim. I'm not sure that's something I'd really want. But
you might not have too many friends.
You'd end up with fewer friends. That's right. So I guess we've talked about him already in the Black Swan episode 2, but this is kind of the first book in his series. And for those who haven't listened to the episode, we thought we'd give a short bio on him, probably an abridged version.
Yeah, I think the Black Swan was described as one of the most 12 influential books since World War II, according to the Sunday Times, and it's certainly had a big impact on, I think, both of us after reading it. So, and this book is it's like an ease into the Black Swan, I felt. And he kind of talks about his whole manifesto and his whole way of looking at things, I felt.
Yeah, he introduces you to the concept of randomness. And then the other books I feel like are more dedicated to specific aspects of what randomness does to the world. So
the brief bio, he was born in Lebanon in 1960 and he lived there for his childhood. He was part of like the elite society. So he had family members who were in government. I think his great-grandfather was a deputy PM, and this gave him an interesting perspective to come into the Civil War, which broke out, which was one of the most influential parts of shaping how he thinks about the world and his life. I think he actually remembers looking over a landscape of, just, mortars and missiles and, what are those tracer bullets flying across the night sky.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a thing they did for entertainment, just to watch the war happening in their own backyard. And he's just,
God, what a change.
And so I think that was one of the moments where he kind of struck on this randomness thing, because basically his whole entire life had been shifted on its head, being part of the, I guess, elite in society to now just being, everyone being equalised. So a really, really great eye-opening moment for him. And eventually he moved to America.
Yeah. He kind of talked about, I suppose, with his uncles and stuff, how after the war had broken out that they believe, they were kind of talking about like it was inevitable, like these things triggered it and it was always going to happen. But beforehand, they hadn't done anything to prepare themselves for such an eventuality, and in many ways like lost all their livelihoods and lives and money and things like that. So he kind of saw those two things and thought, well, this doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, he seemed like a bit of a free spirit too, I think. I think he could have been like the black sheep in the family to some degree, is the vibe I was getting, because he was, arrested and was always participating in protests and different things. So I think he was quite an active, active participant in trying to change or make things different, maybe. So he did eventually get out of Lebanon and move to America. And this is where he became part of the Wall Street crowd. And just some little insight into his life, though. He was living in Manhattan's Upper East, and he was making quite a bit of money, because he was in quantitative finance, and so he did quite well out of that. But his this grand New York apartment had nothing in it. The only thing that was in it were books. And he basically goes on to say that each time he would be walking past a furniture store or trying to go to a furniture store, he would, before he got there, he would run into a bookstore and end up buying a few books and then never actually buy the furniture that he'd gone out to buy in the first place. So I don't think he ever spent any time in the house.
He's definitely a well-read man, isn't he? And yeah, he's a mathematician effectively that applied his skills on Wall Street.
Yeah. The good thing about this book was that he gave more insight into his life and his kind of upbringing to some degree than what you maybe get out of The Black Swan. And he also tells this story with these couple of heroes, which is almost seems like a metaphor about some of the ways in which he's lived his own life. I think it's Nero in the book, which we might get onto a little bit later. But it was quite nice just seeing some of that stuff. And one of the things that really struck me, mate, was he was a tinkerer. He loved to tinker with things. And one of the things that he encountered being within the kind of mathematical finance world that he lived was the Monte Carlo engine. And so basically he taught himself to build them and was thrilled to just tinker around with them and play with them and tweak different things. So, yeah.
Yeah, he was able to kind of generate multiple futures, as he said, and what was actually likely and unlikely to happen. Have you ever done any Monte Carlo modeling?
Yeah.
Or anything?
It's particularly used in like, or trying to determine cost of projects or cost of capital infrastructure and that type of stuff. So that's my brief background in Monte Carlo engines. But basically you have like a model for how you believe things will fit together and all the constraints around it, and you kind of vary the constraints within particular ranges, and across all those different combinations of different ranges and things, you run out this scenario model, thousands of times or however many times you need to, and and then you find what's called like the P50 or the P80, depending on the type of cost structure, for example, that you're after in this situation. So hopefully, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting because it kind of gives you, with a certain probability, how likely an event will be under or over a certain threshold. It's just like it's actually a really different way of thinking, and when you do it, it kind of surprised me how awesome it was to kind of see all these different, like you said, different futures playing out in the computer in front of you.
Yeah, and
it's only as good as the inputs you put into it.
So rubbish in, rubbish out. So he was obviously he almost like played with this stuff in his spare time, and this was his thing. And so he obviously then delved into the deep into the mathematics and why these things happen the way they do, and he put in these complicated financial models and see them all operate out in different ways. And this is where he started to get a little bit more technical in how he thought he saw the world. So moving on, he, as a result, seemingly was quite successful in his time in the finance industry. So one of the big things for him was to make his what's called the fuck you money, as he terms it. And it was basically enough money to give him financial independence. And so he worked at Credit Suisse, he's worked at First Boston, CIBC, Deutsche Bank, and numerous others. And he's been advisors for many different funds and financial industries, for governments on approaching risk and things. So he's done a lot of stuff in this space, and the way that he goes about it is kind of like a real kind of risk averse approach. It's not about forecasting out what the future holds. It's about understanding how volatile or how risky it is at the moment. And so, which means that during times of big crashes and things, he's done exceedingly well. So the 2000 NASDAQ dive and 2007, 08 GFC, he absolutely raked it in. Huge amounts of money.
And recently too.
That's true. Yeah. I think, I can't recall how much, it was 4,000% return last quarter. So yeah, just nice. A casual 4,000% return on a fund that he's like this scientific advisor for.
Yeah. Right. So look, he feasts once every 10 years, effectively. And it's quite interesting, though, that he took the fuck you money, as you say, and used it to like basically think and write kind of quit his day job, get out of the hustle. I'm only
reciting what he calls it. It's not the term I came up with.
Is that your disclaimer?
That's my disclaimer.
Okay. Fair enough.
And then you'll probably hear me swear about 16 other times throughout this episode.
Well, we needed to swear then because it's part of the story.
It is. Yeah, I'm just justifying that reason.
Mum, if you're listening, that's why I swore.
So, and more recently, he made a lot of money, for better or for worse during COVID and the big crash that was had there. But he also, back in January, he put out what was trying to be like a public service announcement about how much of a danger COVID was going to be, and basically imploring that airports and things shut down. Yes, airports will take a hit now, but it'll be worth it. And obviously was disregarded, and then March rolls around and that happened anyway. So very interesting, man.
Yeah. So I guess this book is about really the role of random events in your life, and that effectively, luck plays a much bigger role in what happens than perhaps people realize. And then that has a whole lot of other interesting effects and counterintuitive aspects to it. depending on how random the environment that you are involved in is. And I think that from him being in Lebanon and then going into Wall Street, he's put himself, the first one, he's been exposed to a kind of black swan event that's kind of made him sit up and go, hang on, that doesn't make sense. And secondly, he's put himself into an environment that's highly random. And he's kind of seen it in a way that no one else has really articulated quite like he has, and brought all these concepts together. And throughout the book, he talks about a lot of those things.
Yeah. I don't think I've had any major, certainly no major black swan events, directly impact me, mate, in my life, particularly like something like a civil war outbreaking. What about you?
I mean, nothing that extreme. I would say what we're going through now, in my mind, kind of counts. I've certainly been feeling the COVID effects.
Although I think
pretty recently, I think that's the closest thing.
I think Nassim will clearly emphasise that it's by far not a black swan, because we could see it coming.
Yeah, but I didn't. So to me, it is.
That's interesting. So. That's an interesting thought. So it's about like your perspective in that situation.
Yeah, I think so. And then I suppose like there's other major events that you could probably see in hindsight have had big impacts on you that you didn't really realize at the time, say a signal and noise kind of thing. But yeah, we're kind of lucky to have lived in a pretty stable country in Australia for most of our lives. So that's why these ideas are really interesting as well.
One thing I really like, because we kind of look at randomness as being scary. You know, it's like the unknown. We're coming into the unknown. It's things that might catch us off guard and might cause us harm, you know? But what he kind of explains in the book is that obviously randomness is part of it, and it's actually causes a lot of good and a lot of positive. And you know, we need to, he says, you know, it's like, it's almost like he wants us to have like a healthy relationship with randomness and just realize it for what it is. And I love the example he pulled out about Buridan's donkey. Have you heard about, you remember the Buridan's donkey?
Tell me about it.
So that's where you've got a donkey, right? And he's sitting equal distances from a watering hole, clean watering hole, and then on the other side of him is this like green pastured land that he can have a feast of all the food that he wants to. And he's sitting equal distance between them. Yet Buridan's donkey in his world has no concept of randomness, and there is no randomness that goes on inside of him. Or maybe he's just dumb, we're not sure. And so because he's sitting equal distance in between and realizes that he's actually both hungry and thirsty, he doesn't actually move. And so he just ends up dying in the same spot. And so the point...
So he needs a nudge.
He needs a nudge, yeah. And so that's where randomness comes in, because randomness gives us the nudge to go in one direction. It may not be the right direction that, you know, we may have been slightly more hungry and we might have moved towards the water instead, but we've made a move.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like the randomness that he's describing is kind of agnostic. It's neither here nor there. It's not out to get you or out to help you, but if you understand it, or if you, maybe more importantly, if you don't, it will affect your life without you realizing it. And that will probably be negative because you're kind of oblivious. But if you understand it, you can kind of harness its power in some ways to understand the world around you, but also to help you where you want.
What would you say, mate, is one of his like, or his biggest like thing to avoid, you know, from a random situation or random encounters?
Well, I mean, that is a difficult one, but I think what he tries to say is that you need to avoid what he calls blow up risk. And he took this idea from the markets. And so in his time in the stock markets, and a lot of this book is based around, he relates the ideas of randomness to his time in the financial markets and talks about interesting stories. And effectively, what he kind of talks about is that people come into the stock market and they're the high-flying trader who's winning, and making heaps of money and doing all this great stuff. And they're seen as like almost like a prophet because they're able to kind of predict the future and give all these great stock tips. And then all of a sudden, something changes that they didn't expect, and bang, they lose more money than they've ever made because they've actually got this asymmetric risk relationship going on where they're making all this money, but there's a kind of big sword sitting above their neck ready to drop. And that when it does, they're so exposed on the downside that they end up losing everything and then some, and they get wiped out of the business, and they call that blowing up. And he gives lots of different examples of the ways that people do that. But effectively, what it means is that you probably don't understand the cause and effect relationships of the world around you because it's so complex. But if you kind of feel like you do and make all your decisions and have no redundancy and go as hard as you can to the, extreme to try and maximize your profits or whatever you're doing, then you're probably exposing yourself to a huge downside. So cap the downside in all situations because you're probably not smart enough to know what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it, mate. It's like, yeah, each time you're like maybe leveraging something up, so the common way to maybe make more money in the stock market is if you are leveraged, because if you make 1% on $1 million, it's a lot better than making 1% on $100, invest. But with that comes the risk. And so each time you do that, whilst your situation from how much risk you're exposed to might not have, the chances of having a situation that you might lose may not have changed. The impact of losing is now like so much more impactful. And so that's that idea of asymmetry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. You're exposed way more one way than the other, and it only takes one of those events to wipe you out. And this is why you don't want to, borrow the maximum possible to, buy that extra house that you don't really need or something, because that kind of conservatism can save you because you don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the future, even though you think you do. And so you may not see it coming, but all you need to know is something might be. Something good might be too, but something bad might be as well.
Yeah. Yeah, spot on. He always brings up in the book the dentist. And the dentist plays in a far less risky game than what, say, the person in finance does. And it's almost like pay a bit closer attention to people like the dentist who are exposed to needing to show success or show skill or show ability every single day. Whereas something like the financial industry, you simply could be successful after, for a number of years without actually possessing any skill at all.
Yeah, he kind of gives the example of like if you went into, I'll just make my own example up based off the same thing and kind of he's saying is that you fill a room with 10,000 people playing roulette, and let's just say you're only allowed to bet on black and red, and they're 50% chance each. There's no zero. So that at one point, after the first spin, half of the people will get knocked out of the tournament. If you've got to put your money in, and then the next time, probabilistically half again. But there'll be some people, particularly if the amount of people playing, the population is huge, that will just keep winning just by chance. It's just going to happen. You'll end up getting regression to the mean, but there will be some people that are just wildly successful, and then you'll have people going over there going, oh, geez, how do they do it? Well, I look at the last 6 numbers and I can see that they're all evens, and so then I compute them all and divide them by 6. Oh shit, that's the new winning formula, and then this keeps happening until they put all their money on and then they lose it all, because it's actually a little bit, that is a game of chance. So, but the dentist is more of a low variance area where you've got to be skillful. You can't butcher someone's mouth. They've got the asymmetry kind of the other way. Like if you make a really big mistake on 5 patients, you're not going to have a dental practice for that long. You need to show up and be good at your job every day, and you accumulate slowly. That seems to be if you're playing in the physical world, you're more likely to be in probably more of a low volatility environment, and you'll be less exposed to these wild variances.
Yeah, you probably you won't have a successful dental practice, and you probably get sued. Have some very unhappy customers.
Yeah, hopefully you've got insurance. Yeah, exactly.
There's actually, I don't know if you've seen these before, but this is actually really common in like email marketing by some shady financial characters, and they what tends to happen is they might start out with a pool of X number of people, let's say 100 people, and they will basically show 2 opposite results. It's like this stock is going to go up, or this stock is going to go down, or something like that. And then you get that in your inbox and you're like, yeah, what a load of rubbish. And then you see the next one, you see the next one, you see the next one. And what's actually, and in each one, they're making just opposite predictions from the other prediction, right? And so what happens is the people that, if the stock actually goes up in the first after the first email, and you are receiving one of the stock going up emails, you will see the second email. But if you were in the basket that saw the email that the stock's going to go down, you won't ever hear from them again. And so this just keeps happening. And eventually, after like 10 goes at this, they're like, well, guys, this has been a great series. You've seen how we've been able to pick 10 stocks in a row with our special formula. If you'd like some more insight, sign up here. And you look at it, you go, wow, they've picked 10 stocks in a row. These guys know what they're doing. Yet you're actually missing all the losers that are sitting there.
That's diabolical.
Yeah, and obviously with the power of email, you can set it out to thousands of people at once. So very interesting. Be careful what newsletters you sign up for.
Yeah, that's right. You have to avoid those ones. Yeah, so I guess it's interesting that he kind of talks about, I suppose, another version of the. But before I say that, actually, it's important to note that he doesn't say it's all luck. There's skill involved, and there's things you can do to make sure that you are successful. It's not just a random game. You have to be skillful to play, but luck plays more of a role in your life and randomness than you really realize, because the world is more difficult to understand the cause and effect relationships than you think. So to kind of take the idea of this lucky stock picker to another level, he talks about the kind of the monkey and the typewriters. Get enough monkeys with enough typewriters with enough period of time, you'll eventually get one of the great works of fiction, I suppose.
Shakespeare, mate.
Or non-fiction. Yeah. And so it kind of, but then we've all kind of heard that before, but then he sort of says, well, would you then pay the monkey for his second book?
What's your answer? I was waiting for your answer.
Well, I'd be intrigued to read it, but I'd say no. Sorry, there was a bit of lag on your end, so I was just waiting. So a bit of a connection issue. But absolutely, of course you wouldn't, because it's kind of rubbish. But the more you understand the world is just so interconnected and so crazy, like that. And that we love to fit narratives around things to make us feel like we understand it, then that's kind of
the crux.
Becomes more like a monkey and typewriter situation.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, mate, is he just wants people to appreciate randomness and just be aware of it, because we just simply, I think he points out quite well that we just don't grasp it. I want to read a small quote. He says, ask your local mathematician to define probability. He would most probably show you how to compute it as opposed to actually explain it. And I think you would struggle to tease it out. But then he goes on to say that probability is just the belief in the existence of an alternative outcome, cause or motive. And so that's very fascinating, like the belief in one of those things that it could possibly happen. It's like the alternative realities.
He's got a real problem with the way probability's taught as well, because it's generally taught in those sort of environment, like talking about scenarios like what I described with the roulette wheel or some sort of game, or these sort of really closed system environments. And it gives this kind of false narrative about the neat probabilities of chess or something, when the world isn't really like that.
Yeah. That's the ludic fallacy, isn't it? I think that's actually from the Black Swan though. Which we're not allowed to touch on today, Lockie.
Sorry, skipping ahead. Tell me about the.
I was going to say one.
I want to hear about the birthday paradox.
So, if you meet someone randomly, there is a 1 in 365.25 chance of you sharing their birthday. Okay, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Really unlikely. Like you feel like it's impossible.
Yeah.
Almost.
And a considerably smaller one of having the exact birthday of this same year. And that makes a lot of sense. Although I'm sure you could probably have increase your odds by picking someone that looked similar in age to you. So sharing the same birthday would be a coincidental event that you would discuss at the dinner table, no doubt. So let us take the situation where there are 23 people in a room. What is the chance of there being 2 people with the same birthday? And this is where it gets very strange, is you go, well, 1 in 365. I've got no idea. It's ridiculous, and maybe times by 23, a ridiculously small number. And the answer is 50%. And the reason is because we're not specifying which people need to share a birthday. Any pair works. But the way that we look at that problem, like just from your logical perspective, or at least from my own logical perspective, is you're like, it's super small. There's no way 23 people in the room have a 50% chance of sharing the birthday.
Yeah, it's kind of like he talks about the same sort of thing. It's like where you bump into somebody over the other side of the world you didn't expect to.
Mm.
And you go, what are the chances of us meeting here under the Eiffel Tower? That's amazing. But what you're actually testing for there is that, will I meet anyone that I've ever met at any single point in this trip? Not, will I meet John and Jimmy under the Eiffel Tower today, which is a much, much more specific thing. It's actually like saying, oh, I don't want the monkey to write Shakespeare. I want him to write Othello.
Yeah.
That's a lot harder.
That's why you don't hire that monkey again.
That's it.
So, mate, do you want to tell me a little bit about, you mentioned signal and noise. Do you want to tell me a little bit about it and what it means?
Yeah, so it probably ties into what we were discussing earlier around being able to understand what is a causal outcome. Well, that's not the right way to say it. What is causal to cause an outcome? Maybe that's better. So this is something else that we think, because we backfit narratives after the fact of when certain things happen, there's always a way that we've been able to see what caused a certain thing. So if the stocks go up tomorrow in the morning, they'll be like, oh, it's because Trump announced this trade tariffs have been lifted or something. And then if it goes down in the afternoon, it's like Trump's trade tariff didn't have the effect that we thought it would. It had the opposite effect. So you can kind of, and you can notice this a lot if you watch sport. This happens a lot if you're watching a game of footy or something. You'll be watching the first half and Collingwood will be killing it. They're like, oh, it's just the way that the teams work together. They've had a great week on the track. Yeah, that's it. Had a great week on the track, and the way they're using the handballs is fantastic. It's fair, And then they start going downhill, and all of a sudden the narrative switches. And it may just be the to and fro of the game. I don't think they really know why. So if you take that idea that we put an explanation to something that's happened, we kind of conflate that to mean then that we feel that we can know ahead of time what is something that's going to cause a big impact. So if you're on the train in the morning reading the newspaper, you can't, and you may just want to do it for entertainment, but there's a fair chance you're trying to read it to kind of understand what's important. What do I need to watch out for? It's kind of a human thing. Oh, the government's doing this or that, or, this has happened in the local square. There's been this crime or what have you. Somewhere in your mind, you're actually kind of going, oh, I need to look out for that one important thing that I know that if I see it, I'll know not to do this or to do this. But really, you actually are overestimating your ability to tell what's important. And only after the longer the period of time that goes by, the more you're able to spot what actually was probably the cause, because it becomes apparent because everything plays out. So an example may be that coronavirus. We may have read that in the paper late December and not really worried too much about it. But by, sitting here in mid the following year, we now know that that's one of the most defining events of probably all of our lives. But at the time, it's not that easy to spot among the myriad of other news. So that's the noise. It's all the noise is just everything, all the information coming at you. But within the noise, there is a signal and the important things. And so, yeah, he really talks about trying to not really focus too much on trying to predict that in the moment.
Yeah, he talks about, he actually says that seeing people reading the Wall Street Journal on their way to work in the morning was his insurance policy for him to continue on in his option trading. So he essentially refuses to read the news, and it's because, you know, people read it for entertainment, you know, and see it for entertainment. Just don't see it as a source of real information or information that you need to take too much concern of. The things that you take concern of, you will realize. It will be very obvious. It's like, we're not going to miss when we discover the automobile. You know, you work that out. That'll be obvious.
Well, yeah, it kind of is and it isn't though. Like, I'm reading a book on innovation at the moment, and it's fascinating how often things are invented, including the combustion engine, and not then applied in the right area or actually put to use. So even things that just seem so darn obvious to us now, there's like lists and lists of these that are essential to our life, weren't obvious at the time that these were actually useful. So that's a signal and noise issue.
Yeah, 100%. Wow. So, but the fact is the automobile was clearly a useful thing. And so it's stood the test of time. It's something that we're still reporting on to today. You know, I'm sure it was getting reported on back in the start of the 20th century. And so
it's pretty obvious now that that's a signal. Is what you're saying, isn't it?
Correct. It's like we almost read, or at least maybe I've seen myself fall in the trap of, like, you know, reading the news of not wanting to miss out on what the exciting thing is or what's currently happening. But there's a degree of it, you know, and you know, sure, it's great for a bit of conversation, a bit of banter, but to think that you're going to miss out on something, it's not going to happen. And if there's something really, really big, you're going to find out about it some other way.
Yeah, that's right. You won't miss it. Not in this day and age. So his whole approach is, don't worry about the specific thing because you won't predict it. Just know that something really unexpected will happen every once in a while, and be ready for whatever that, but have enough kind of contingency that you're kind of covered for it. And in his case, he does the opposite. That's kind of how he got his FU money, is that
nice. Censored.
Is that he kind of sits, yeah, you should have done that.
Sorry.
Mrs. Griffin would be much happier. So that's kind of how he did that, is that he puts these bets that he just sits in waiting for something. He doesn't know what, but it'll happen. And, you know, another version of the signal and noise is that, you know, if you're worried about noise all day, you're in constant motion, you know, moving around, trying to figure things out. Whereas if you're worried about signal, you can kind of only focus on things that are high impact.
Yeah, I think he does.
And kind of be ready for
he does a good job of kind of tying it in with, in fact, he actually directly quotes a lot of it, was Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work around, which is Thinking Fast and Slow, which was another episode. But he does a lot of, to explain just how much we prefer certain situations over other situations. Like, we prefer to have little bits of good all along the way rather than one big hit of good, if that makes sense. So in the sense of, people would prefer to be winning, you know, let's say 3% on the stock market every single day. And actually this example is probably going to fall over because of compounding, but let's just say that you make $10 every day on some portfolio versus making $100 after 5 days. You know, when you extrapolate that out to a longer time horizon that you can't quite grasp as easily, we much prefer the feeling that comes with the little wins each day, as opposed to the bigger win, which is actually more beneficial in that sense.
Yeah, it's just unnatural.
Yeah. So what does he define as being successful then? You know, or in the sense of what is success in this like random filled world that he?
I mean, that's kind of quite a big question.
Hey, mate.
I guess he kind of talks.
That's why you're here. You're here to answer all the big questions.
A little warning wouldn't hurt. I would have prepared for this one. No, I'm kidding. So the definition of success, well, I think it's not blowing up. But then I think it's also like, trying to find something that's going to happen across all the large majority of the alternative histories that could play out. You know, I think in the definition of, say, what he's specifically talking about. But I think in terms of a successful life, he would talk about one that's focused not on worrying about the noise of life, but actually taking your time to really not get caught up in that and actually read, educate yourself deeply on the way that things work over time, and then actually, enjoying the things that you want to do and feast every once in a while to try and get as much personal freedom as you can, get off the treadmill.
Yeah. He from like a randomness, a random world perspective, because he kind of, he definitely sees the world as being a random world. And, I think he's certainly onto it there. He draws on Leibniz, which was a philosopher and who spoke about, God's mind included an infinity of possible worlds. And so his idea is that you try and basically avoid ruin in as many of those as possible, if that makes sense. So by your decisions, don't blow up in as many of those worlds as possible. Is probably the way he would see success in such a random perceived world.
You'll notice a lot, your anxiety goes down a lot if you stop worrying about the noise as well.
Yeah.
Just a final point on
just that. the feel good news.
So now my turn to ask you a question.
Right.
Survivorship bias. How does it apply to, what is it and how does it apply to his ideas?
So we kind of touched on it earlier, right? And we didn't call it out, but let's, in your case of roulette that you spoke about before, right? We've got.
I'd prefer you talk about monkeys.
Okay. This is the constraint you're putting on the problem.
Yeah, I'm trying to make it harder.
Right.
Because you basically asked me what's the meaning of life before.
No, I didn't. So, you didn't listen to the question, Lachlan.
I'm being facetious.
So
it's not about success. Before you read too far into that.
This is good. So monkeys, all right. So we all know that chimpanzees are pretty like ferocious. Actually, we don't all know. I think I actually just saw a David Attenborough documentary about chimpanzees being like ferocious tribal hunters. And they basically go on these like raiding hunts, these raiding parties of raiding other tribes. So obviously one tribe is going to come up victor and the other one's going to not do so well. So I think in applying that, you could look at the approach that across 10,000 of these different raiding parties, because 10,000 was the number we're using today. Right? Mm-hmm. And we notice that after a few years of doing this, that there's a certain way in which the monkeys from the still alive raiding parties, the way in which they peel a banana. And so because of the survivorship bias that we have towards these monkeys being successful because of their abilities, and these are raiding parties who are equally equipped. They've got equal skill on both sides. I think we need to constrain that.
Important.
That's an important constraint in your obscure problem. And so
I've made this hard for you. You're doing well.
I'm not sure if I am. So, and then, so the monkeys are equivalent or relatively equivalent in terms of how they're equipped. And what we actually end up doing is we go, there must be something going on with the monkeys who've survived 3 years on. And we may attribute that to some idiosyncratic behavior that they have, like peeling a banana or something like that, where in actual fact, it may just be total randomness. Now, I suspect in the world of chimpanzee brawling and the ferocious fights that they have you seen them, by the way?
I haven't watched them, but I've kind of heard about some of their horrible antics. I mean, that is like, the animal kingdom is a brutal place.
It's a wild world out there. So they like rip each other's limbs off and stuff. It's crazy.
God.
So anyway, just on that.
Aren't they like our closest relative almost?
I think so. And I'm seeing some parallels.
Yeah.
So the monkeys, it's us attributing things to things that might be purely based on luck. But in the world of this monkey fighting, you probably get through based on your merit and probably just how big your monkeys are more than anything else, or how fast they are. So it's probably not the greatest example.
Yeah, in that example.
Can you tweak
in that
my
example?
answer?
Okay, what about? Well, let's take it from the face. Well, let's go monkeys and typewriters then instead.
Oh, you're coming back to the same example.
More random.
I like this. I wasn't allowed to use roulette, but you're allowed to use monkey and typewriters.
You could have told whatever monkey story you wanted. So I think, for me, the monkey and the typewriters is like, you instead of 10,000 monkeys for 100 million years, you put 10 million monkeys in there for that same 100 million years. And then you find the group of 12 monkeys that have written partial edits of parts of Shakespeare's work, and you'll find some sort of pattern that links them all together, So it's like, they all have like a slightly darker coat, or they're longer or something. And that, you're actually looking at this group of 12, but you probably, if you looked at the 10 million or whatever I said, you'd find that 60% of them have this same dark coat. But because you're only looking at the winners, you're kind of deducing that there's something about these monkeys that they all have in common that's causing them to win. So this can be seen as a direct parallel in a highly random environment, such as tech investing or something, that there are things that you need to have to get in the game, such as a really hard work ethic, knowing how to code computers, things that are kind of obvious. But then a lot of the success that they have can be relatively random and dependent on, what's the kind of the timing, what everyone's feeling, the boost it gets from a certain thing early on, who knows? And that is a particularly highly random environment where there's a winner-take-all kind of situation, and you're left with a cohort of white, geeky males who've kind of been to Stanford and they kind of all made these companies. But that doesn't mean that that's kind of the archetype for the people who make it, you know what I mean? So, or whether they wear T-shirts or they've got this casual style, or is it that they
wear a turtleneck?
They make their bed a certain way in the morning, wear a turtleneck, do things like, have these grand visions. Like Steve Jobs is maybe a really good example of this, all these different things we can kind of draw out of his style that many other people probably have too. And it's not that simple,
Yeah. Well, you've got like a complex thing, which is like building a business and building a startup in a complex world, in terms of that complex thing fitting into the complex world. And so maybe it's probably, better, as you started out talking about it, mate, was talking at it from the perspective of the investor, and seeing a successful investor in startups, and it's like, oh, what do you look for? I look for the white geeky guy from Stanford. Well, I bet you that is not what he's actually on the lookout for. I bet you, he or she is on the lookout for many, many other things. But it still doesn't mean that we can attribute all those various things as being what the keys are for the success of that startup. Because they could just be in the pool of the 10,000 others.
Yeah, like that particular attribute that you're trying to say is kind of causal can actually just be completely random, that these people have those things in common, Again, we're trying to use simple examples of the monkey and the typewriter because the real world's more complicated than that. Skill counts, this sort of stuff. But the idea kind of holds in that simple example, And I think it comes down to this is where he kind of says to pick your heroes wisely, because he to quote him in the book, he says, mild success can be explainable by skills and labour. Wild success is generally attributable to variance. And that one stuck with me. I thought that was quite interesting. Your dentist versus your stock picker.
Yeah. Well, it's like, don't look at the Facebooks of the world. Look at the ones that, instead of however many billions of dollars Facebook is worth, look at the ones that might be worth a few million or 10 million or 20 million or something, a much smaller scale. And there might be a lot more things that you can attribute in there.
See, that's interesting. I think that, again, this is the kind of the dentist versus the tech guy, I think, is really relevant with this, is that, the low random environments are more likely to have success via skill. Doesn't mean that the other people aren't successful in lack of their skill, but they're probably more successful than they deserve to be for their skill in the random environment. So don't just look at the winners.
And you mentioned before about correlation and causation, right? And I thought that was a really, it's like, just because we have every single one of these founders wears a T-shirt every day, for example, doesn't mean that's the cause of this particular success or makes the bed in a particular way. And he actually plucks out this really great example in the book about from Carl Sagan, who actually I think Carl Sagan used to wear a turtleneck. So this is a very fitting example.
Classy guy.
And so he was a scientist and astronomer. He passed away a few years ago, but he was very like anti, or he was very on like a mission to like weed out things that weren't seemingly scientific. And one example he drew was something about cancer patients going to visit Lourdes in France. Are you familiar with Lourdes in France?
Is that where you get the holy water?
That's the holy water, yeah. It's yeah. So I think must be like Catholic or Christian, famous site. And so he did this study looking into cancer patients who went to visit Lourdes, and obviously try and whatever. And basically what he ended up finding out was that the people that visited Lourdes were less likely to survive their cancer than those who didn't go to visit Lourdes. And then so his question was, so are we to presume that people who visit Lourdes have a higher chance of dying than those who will automatically just go into remission?
Jeez.
So what do you take from that, Lockie?
I take from that no, it's not perfectly, it could have swung one way or the other. Over time, it'll likely regress to the mean of being equal to that, unless there's some other factor, such as really sick people go to Lourdes. Now, I'm only answering that in that way because you've asked me a question in an episode that we're talking about randomness specifically, so I can pick it up. But if you'd mentioned something unrelated to this in passing one day, I wouldn't have kind of picked that up, I don't think.
And that's very interesting, mate. The information you may not have had about that thing is, as you said, it may be simply only patients with stage 4 cancer were the ones that were attending Lourdes. We don't know, but there's often information that's left out that we don't know, and information that might be included. So, very interesting thought.
I love this. I love this quote that you've picked out here. It says, "Remember that nobody accepts randomness in their own success, only in their failure." That's fantastic. I do that so much.
Me too. I think we're all subject to that. And whilst we're kind of making a bit of a mockery earlier about picking stocks and investing in startups and running a startup and things, if you were in the situation of any of those people. If I was in the situation of any of those people, you'd be like, no, this is, I know what I'm doing here. I'm across all this. You become invested in your own way of seeing the world, and your ego gets tied up in all of that. So, but if you looked at, if we were running, equivalent startups, for example, you'd almost kind of see the luck in the other ones, in where the other one had got to, where they were, versus all the hard work that you're putting in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's human nature, isn't it? But yeah, it's certainly a mix of skill and luck, and how much of each is different in every example, I think. But it's a fascinating book. And look, it's just a really nice introduction to these ideas. And we've covered a few of them in this episode, some of them better than others probably, but it's worth a look. It might change your perspective on some stuff and leave you thinking a little differently about the world.
So mate, what is the one big thing for you from this book, your takeaway?
To me, it's the signal and the noise, is that I spend so much time worrying about what is noise when I should just be looking a bit further ahead and not getting caught up so much in the day-to-day, whether it be the news, which I've managed to cut down a lot, but I've probably gone back to the news a bit since all this upheaval in the world has happened, and I'm not sure it's making much of a difference, and it's certainly not making me that happy. But also I get caught up in the noise of the day-to-day at work, where I'll just be trying to fight a fire that doesn't really need my attention, but I'll want to do it so I feel busy and important and useful and important. So I need to kind of take a step back from that and focus on the things that are the real things that make a big difference. So what about you?
I don't want to conflate things with the black swan, right? So I'm going to try and avoid that. And I think the black swan it kind of opened up the mind's eye to some of this stuff. So I think one of the big ones for me was he was very much this survivorship bias, but approaching the survivorship bias not from like a perspective of, not just the fact that there's a lot of randomness in it, but from like a perspective of what we're just talking about, like compassion, and not seeing randomness just in other people's, the way where other people have gotten to, but being compassionate towards, all the hard effort and work and stuff that's gone into it. And then reflecting back on myself is then seeing some of the randomness that pervades its way into my own life in a much greater way, and try and just tap into that. And I think what comes as a result of that journey is a deeper gratitude, which is, I think a great way to think about things and be grateful for what you do have.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. I really like that. I might steal it.
You're welcome, mate. You can have it. There's plenty. We can share it around.
Cheers. So have you got a closing quote for us?
We've got one today. So this is I think this is actually how he concludes the book. So it's very, very fitting for our closing quote for the episode. He says, "It took me an entire lifetime to find out what my generator is. It is. We favour the visible, the embedded, the personal, the narrated, and the tangible. We scorn the abstract." And that's not the abstractable, by the way. "Everything good, aesthetics, ethics, and wrong, fooled by randomness, with us seems to flow from it." Nice little round off, mate. Thank you. And I'll just say that don't forget you can find full video from this episode and all of our others on YouTube. So keep in contact. And we do have a website up now too called abstractable.co. So go check it out.
Awesome. Thanks.